Good afternoon, friends, and welcome to this session of In Conversation with a Thought Leader. Today, our guest is a renowned person, highly respectable, highly regarded senior HR leader. He is very famous, extremely well known in the business fraternity and the people functions fraternity. Uh, his presence on social media, his influence on social media, early morning anecdotes in the titled as Office Truths have actually it has an immense learning for each one of us, and is being identified as the top 50 senior leaders by Economic Times. Let's welcome the senior partner and chief talent officer, Deloitte, Mr. S.V. Nathan.
Hey, Venkat, thank you so much. That's a lot of generous words. Really appreciate it. And I think you should not be reading too much into a lot of things that have been said. Regardless, it's a pleasure to be live with all of you today. I hope to be at my best, and it's a Friday afternoon, and I do know that this is still work time. So I truly appreciate you taking the time to listening in, and perhaps if it is recorded, I'm sure as it would, we will also find an opportunity to listen to it later should you miss it going live.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nathan. And before we start off, uh, I would like to request you to actually give me a brief background how a bachelor's in science graduate with mathematics as a major moved on to pursue human resource from XLRI Jamshedpur. And how was your journey, and what was there in your mind during the time while you opted for human resources? And how was your journey to become a senior most respected HR leaders today that we have?
Now you're putting a lot of words into my mouth, so let me make this a little more simple.
Hmm.
Honest to God, I wanted to be an engineer,
Uh-huh.
and you're going to prepare for these examinations, and I thought I was good enough. I was not. I don't think I prepared well, and also at that time we were in Nagpur.
Hmm.
And whereas I got admissions to colleges in Nagpur, and I got into Lakshmi Narayan Institute of Technology, and there's a regional engineering college called Vishwesvaraya Regional Engineering College. Of course, now it's called NIT Nagpur or something. But my father could not afford me because we were transferring back to Madras.
Hmm.
And in Madras, the colleges had already opened. I had to go and fend for myself. So I went to my very first college, and of the many searches that I wanted, I actually wanted to do something in economics.
Oh, okay.
The second subject was English.
Hmm.
I said that if I don't get this, I should get this. And the last thing that I had on my mind, by the way, I went to all the colleges, they had shut doors on me because the time was up.
Hmm.
Into the session for almost a month, and I was late. Why? Because schedules are different in different states. And I went to this college called Vivekananda College.
Hmm.
And there was this professor, he denied all admissions. And then there was a kindly old man who just walked into the principal's office. He looked at my credentials. I was good academically. And he had seen that I was also a person into sports. He looked at me and he says, I don't mind taking this boy. And, um, and I was fearing the most because I don't know about you guys, but I didn't want to do mathematics.
Okay.
But, but he said, maths. And my father said, take it because you're not going to get economics. So I said,
Hmm.
okay, I'll take maths. If you don't get what you like what you get. And I decided that I will like mathematics. And I really put my heart and soul into it. At the end of 3 years, I was also the best outgoing student of Vivekananda College. And the question is, uh, I really believed that I really believe that you really have to prepare well for exams. And I don't think I did well enough for CAT. I could have waited for a year more and studied harder and got in. But well, in those days, there was a XAT exam coming up just 20 days later. I really put my heart and soul into it. And the question was, should I take business management or should I take human resources? My uncle, my father's younger brother, was a trade union leader.
Ah,
And I was staying in his house. And he was like he was like a father to me as well. And he was a militant trade union leader.
hmm,
So he used to have a cycle chain as a belt that you wear around your trouser. And somehow I just felt that that was not the way that you should really have a management and labor, those kinds of relationships.
right.
So anyway, when I got into Excel, one of the first thing I did was I went up to him to take his Ashirwad, and he laughed at me, he smiled at me, and he said, "So you have gone the management way, have you?"
Okay.
I had to tell him, well, uncle, the only reason why I went there was hopefully I should be in a position to influence something which makes it easy on people who negotiate with each other.
Right.
He blessed me, and that's how I came into Excel. And I think over a period of time, there have been several instances of people who have coached me. My first job, I stayed there for 12 years. This was in the heart of Bihar, now Jharkhand. This was a manufacturing base.
Mhm.
And I stayed there for about 8 years. Then I came down to Chennai and I was working in a pharmaceutical and agrochemical organization. And I was there for 4 years. And the company split into
Mhm.
Zeneca and then ICI. And then I left ICI. I then wanted to just move in beyond the multinationals. I wanted to experience an Indian organization. And sometimes it's important for us to understand what happens in Indian organizations. So I went into an Indian organizations called Sterling Holiday Resorts. I stayed there for about 3 years plus. Easily one of the finest stints I've ever had ever in my life. So what is distinct about Sterling Holiday was they they really take people who have a good attitude and good aptitude.
Hmm.
Let me dwell on that for just a second. If you look at anybody from ICI, and I'm talking about ICI in those days, because then after beyond, I I think 1994, 1995, the entire organization was then sold off. It demerged, and then it just went its own way. ICI really got the best of the best of the best. So when they are on campus, it was the most desired job on campus. And if anybody, they would select people only from the IITs of the world, no less. And they'll go only to Excel and they'll go to IIM Ahmedabad and perhaps Calcutta, Bangalore to a fault. But otherwise, they will not go anywhere else. I mean, they were very, very Puritan in the way that they would be looking at, and they believe that people from these places who are at the top of the game would be the people who will lead this organization. Cut to chase, if you look at Sterling Holiday, they took people almost off the street, and but people with very good attitude and very good aptitude,
Mhm.
and got them to do some outstanding work. So taking some very ordinary people and getting them to do extraordinary work was what Sterling Holiday did. This is something that I saw up close and personal. I will never forget my 3 years there, because it gives you a thought that, well, you look beyond the degrees that a person possesses. So there's something deeper about human achievement. Not every person comes out from the Harvard or named the best institution in India, the IIM Ahmedabad or the Excels or whatever else that you think is the best institution. So even the best that come out, not very sure whether they would really do very well in their own lives. So how do you measure all this? You measure it perhaps through what is it that they've been able to do both to themselves and to the society around them, and of course the institution that they are part of. And I worked there for 3 years. And then beyond that, I wanted to move into software and IT. I got pulled into an IT organization in Bangalore. And from there, I went to another multinational. And this is again in Bangalore. And somehow I just felt that the calling for working in a very, very large Indian organization was just too great. So I moved into Reliance, and I was there for about 3 years. And they were building out a very large telecom network. And this was the year 2002, 2005. I was there for about 3 years.
Mhm.
And I was then working very closely with all the big names that you can think of in Reliance. I was part of the team which is putting up all of that. Very, very privileged to have worked really close quarters with the biggest names that you have. And again, there was this calling that I was staying in Bangalore, working in another place, Bombay, and working almost like 8 days a week.
Mhm.
So
8 days a
that
week.
was that was getting to me, and I decided to get into something where I could live with my family. I missed the most, and then I moved into Deloitte, which was in Hyderabad. Deloitte at that time was a very, very small shop, and they had just come into India. And and the reason why I joined Deloitte is something I must mention. You don't join another firm because of another 30 pieces of silver. You join organizations because as much as the organization is evaluating you, you're also evaluating the organization. So the people that came in were extremely gracious. It wasn't even sounding like an interview. And we had a good long, almost like a 2 hour chat. Then we had something to eat. This was almost like a brunch, and then it continued for another couple of hours. And I told myself that this almost seems like my first job, where I worked with them for 12 years. I would never have left that organization if they had not demerged. Because ICI is a phenomenal organization. I felt Deloitte is the place. Well, did I know Hyderabad? No. Did I know Deloitte? I had no idea about Deloitte. And did I have sufficient information? No. But then, what did I have? I had the experience of a wonderful set of people that I met. Not one, not two, at least 5 people I met. Some on the calls, some directly, people who made a great impression on me. And I said, this is the place I want to work. And it was about some 1,200 odd people who were there in Hyderabad. I grew it to size and scale, along with a lot of people who were the leaders. I was one of those people around that. And I would say that Deloitte has completely transformed me into a professional that you see today. So I would not arrogate unto self to say, this is what I have done. All I'll say is, this is what I have learned. And I was there with the US firm for 10 years. I'm now with the India firm for the last almost 6 years. And so that's my story. It's been a phenomenal journey of learning, phenomenal journey of a little bit of giving, a lot of receiving, and great people to work with, and discovering nuggets of truth all along the way. And something that you referred to earlier as office truths is something that I keep sharing, because I just felt that this is something which comes easy, and this is something that I could share. And so that's a little bit about me and my journey. So I know this could take a long time. So Venkat, back to you.
I've heard that you're very humble and humility flows, but I think now I'm experiencing it when you say small nuggets. Actually, they are office truths for me. The way I see it is, it can become a thesaurus by itself, which are so subtle anecdotes of management principles which are practically applicable not just in the business or professional sphere, but even from childhood. I share it with my son, who is now in his 12th standard, a 16-year-old son, and it makes a
Wow.
lot of sense to him. Thank you for that. Now, you spoke about, how did you traverse through your career from, after your Excel joining in from your first organization? How did you choose and grew to Deloitte, and the difference between Sterling and ISI, and how do you add in talent? Now, let me ask you, as a HR leader, how do you define talent? Is it a skill? Is it a knowledge? Is it experience? Or is it so-called tier ones or tier twos certificates? Or is it something over and above that? How important is talent? I'm not talking just from an organizational perspective, but for the upliftment or building a nation.
So I will take you back to something that I saw very recently.
Mhm.
And this is something which happened on the we were driving down from Hyderabad to Bangalore, and at some shop we had to stop some way because we wanted a cup of tea, and there was a young boy, and he was changing a cycle tire. That's all that he was doing.
Hmm.
And he must have been all of about 12 years of age. And the way that his hands flew, the way that, and he was smiling, it almost seems that he was into deep meditation in the kind of work that he was doing. And he finished this whole thing with panache. He then pumped a little bit of air into it and then gave it to the customer out there. And I don't think there was any haranguing about what is the money and so on. And I saw the smile on his face, and I walked away thinking that this is talent, because talent is a function of skill. It's a function of a whole host of experience.
Mhm.
It's a function also about what are the different kinds of things that you can do, which is something that I allude to as exposure. Because today you're doing this, tomorrow you could do something else. Day after tomorrow, you don't have to restrict yourself to just being a skilled person changing tires, but you could get into the heart of an engine. And I know that this boy can do exceedingly well out there. So tomorrow, he, beyond just being a mechanic, he can graduate. And I have no idea whether that person was studying in a school. I'm sure that he would, because he just seemed he seemed very different. So part education. And when I say part education, education is important. I don't much bother about education coming in from the tier one or the tier two or the tier three. But what is important is attitude, skills, whole host of knowledge. There's something that I read today in the morning that really appealed to me. How do you assemble all this together?
Mhm.
A person who's talented will do it. So, talent is also a function of action, because that action must lead on to something which is meaningful. So, talent by itself is not just is an adjective or a noun. I would see talent as beyond that a verb, which is something to do with action. So, um, who's a talented salesperson? Sales, as much as you can learn about sales in the best of B schools, you have to experience that on the ground. I still remember I was to go and share with people the skills of selling.
Mhm.
I still remember a gentleman called Rajshekhar. Rajshekhar was my training manager.
Mhm.
And Rajshekhar one day called me and he said, Nathan, you must go and teach this to our people who are the new set of people coming in and joining our organization. So I said, man, this was in Sterling. And man, I said, look, I don't think I'm qualified to do it. Raj could do it because he had been in sales. Then Raj threw a challenge to me. He said, okay, sit through my sessions, and the next time you're on a flight, make sure that you sell a timeshare to a person sitting by your side.
Mhm.
And I took that up as a challenge. And of course, long story short, I learned a little bit about selling. You cannot go and teach something that you don't already know by doing. It's not knowledge which is up here. It's about things that you should be able to do. So that's beyond all of whatever. You asked me a little bit about, can talent be taught? Is talent innate? So skills can be taught. Talent is something which exists within a person.
Mhm.
What we need to do is we need to just draw out that talent. Many do not know what talents they have. So it requires a very, very good coach to know what is the talent within a person. And if you're okay, can I share a story?
Absolutely, Nathan. Please, in fact,
So
pleasure.
I was into running. I wanted to be a runner. Why? Because my father represented the University of Madras.
Uh-huh.
So I wanted to be a runner. So I told my mother I'm going out and I'm going to the corporation ground. And in those days, there were self-appointed coaches there. And so I wore my running shoes. I went up there. I went to the coach. And as is the norm, you touch his feet. And then you say, sir, I want to run the 100 meters. Let me know if I can be a good 100-meter runner. So he looked at me and he said, okay, on your mark, get set, go. I must have run the 100 meters in 14 seconds. Was it good enough? Not at all. I came back to him and I said, sir, how do you think I fared? He said, will not do. And then he also told me that you can't sprint.
Mhm.
Sprinting is not your forte. I came home. I was very unhappy. My mother saw me almost. I was on the verge of tears. She said, "What happened?" So I said, "This is what happened. They told me that I could never be a sprinter." So he said, "Wrong question. Go back to him and ask him, hey, sir, can you tell me what I'm good at? I really would like to run." So went back the next day, same coach, touch his feet, asked him, "Sir, this is what I want." So he smiled at me. He said, "Just yesterday you came and asked me some question. Again, you asked me the same thing. Okay, here is a ground, 400 meters, track, keep running." So I started to run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I had no idea how long I ran. And then he stopped me, brought me by his side, and he patted me on my right shoulder and he said, "Son, you will make a good middle and long distance runner." So Venkat, um, forget what happened thereafter because I then went on to leave to be my captain of my college and all that. But I will never forget what the coach did for me. More importantly, are we asking the right questions? So we need to find a coach who can find the talent in us. If I had gone home and completely stopped my running, and if I didn't have a mother who was able to nudge me and say, ask the right questions, I would never have been into running. And it's very elevating, very elevating. Running is something that I really, really love. Why? Because of that coach. And why that coach? Because of the right question. So back to the talent, we need people in organizations, people around asking the right questions and seeking answers because sometimes we do not know what talents we have and what is it that we could be possibly good at. So that's my short take on talent.
Brilliant. Excellent way explanation. In fact, thank you for that. Slightly taking it bit further on that, connecting it uh, with a business perspective. In many forms, Nathan, in many forums or platforms, right? We get to hear from senior business leaders talk about the importance of collaborative skills, communication, and being able to work in a team, being able to accept and gel in an organization or in a department or in a team is extremely important while hiring their people within that organization. Having said that, at the time of year-end appraisals or promotions or rewards, it is based on individuals' performance rating. right? Are we not, probably involuntarily giving a conflicting message of what the business leaders actually value for? Is it not? See, it's pretty obvious to some extent if a business leader is getting myopic picture and directed towards materialistic. How do you, as a senior HR leader and a culture champion, manage that and try to get it into the right path or in a balanced path?
So this is right off the oven, so I can share something that happened as early as this afternoon.
Mhm.
We had a meeting and where I was setting the expectations that I have of members of my colleagues, my team members. And one of the things that I said was, for these sets of tasks, you are the person who is wholly responsible. You are accountable for it, not even responsible, you're accountable for it.
Okay.
And by the way, you cannot do this task if you do not have these sets of people who are on your side, because you're always a function of somebody else doing their kind of work. So unless you get all those people getting to do their task for you, you cannot get your task done. Who will I, at the end of the year, back to your question, who will I ask at the end of the year whether you've done your task right or not? It is the individual. But the individual cannot do anything without the people who are on the right side, who are those people who will be supporting you. So I talk to all the people who are the people that they've got to be working with. And I said, guys, as much as I'm evaluating this set of people who are the prime owners, recognize that you are the enablers. And if as enablers, you're not able to help the prime owners, then I will dock you equally, because you need to be responsible for that. And by the way, that which you see as an enabler, the person on the left side who is accountable will now move to the right side, because in some other task, you will be the primary owner. And so it's something that has to be done. So when organizations look at the outcomes, they will be looking at the person. The way that the person works in an organization, that person has got to be working through in a collaborative fashion. How do you set a collaborative environment? Is to explain what is expected of people in the collaborative network. So taking it forward, what we also do is we say, okay, if there's a sale which is affected, and I'm the person who has affected the sale, I cannot say, look, I did this all by myself. Maybe rare instant I would have done everything by myself, but it's very rare. Some places I would have taken the help of Venkat. And there, Venkat can, as part of what he has said, this is what I've done during the year, he can very easily say, yes, I helped Nathan secure the sale. And people can go and check, because today we have systems which will be able to talk to each other and say, yes, this is done. So in an organization, I believe if you want to spread a collaborative culture of getting people work with each other, get people to understand why this interconnectedness is important, but hold the person feet to fire on their goals, because that is paramount. Otherwise, trying to hold 5 people responsible for one task would not be the way organizations can manage anything. So it is an easy way to move forward. This is my 2 cents, Venkat.
Excellent. In fact, this gives a clarity to lots of people, because whenever I speak to students, because when I keep interacting with students as well as people who have just started their career or probably moving into the first level of managerial role or supervisory role, and this is something which always they come and ask me, and I think I'm going to share this snippet of answer to them now after this one. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that, Nathan. Now, taking it a bit forward and slightly moving away from this, we know in the current scenario, last 1 year, close to 1 year, across the globe, we have all seen what one virus can do it, right? So I'm not going to talk about or ask you about how it impacted and what were the negative things. I think too much of negativities have already flown across the social media and all interviews. But certainly there are certain positive things that this situation has brought in, or it has shown some kind of a light to us, which probably we would not have ever tried or seen that one. As a business and a HR leader, people specialist, please list down three things that you have noticed which are extremely positive and which are scalable for the future.
Oh, first of all, laud you on this wonderful question, because I think that there are three things which are absolutely important, which is something that we can learn because of the pandemic. The first one is connect. The way that we have connected virtually, using technology beds, using every form of reaching out to people has never been seen in the last almost 400 years of since the Industrial Revolution. The last 400 years have never seen this kind of connectedness. This is something that we can learn. How do we really connect with people? There are people who have, God forbid, may have lost somebody in their families. There are organizations who may have lost people. But look at the element. You don't have to go too far. Look at the effort of one of the greatest stalwarts in the country, Mr. Ratan Tata, going all the way to Pune to check on an old employee, a friend of his, and inquiring about his health and coming back. So you're able to see an ocean of goodness and kindness through this first one, which is connect. Second one is care.
Here.
Organizations have really started to look at care as being a lot more wholesome than the welfare measures that we were all used to.
Mm-hmm.
So from welfare to wellness. So you're looking about care, you're looking at care very holistically. You're looking at people's emotional well-being, you're looking at people's psychological well-being, you're also looking at their physical well-being, and you're saying, are they financially secure as well? So there's a lot of goodness that's about the care part of it. And the third one, which I think is extremely important, is commitment. The way organizations have stayed committed to people. Yes, there are organizations which have, we all see these cycles up and down. Commitments are in different levels. But sometimes it's heartwarming to see the level of commitment that organizations have taken to be of support to each other. And the pandemic has really taught us this. Commitment is not a fly-by-night. Commitment is a deep commitment. And this is something which will endure. This is something which will endure. I was asked what is going to be, what are the things that will stay back? This is what will stay back. What is a commitment to each other? We'll hold hands. I may have lost something, but there I find people out there holding hands to receive me and say, hey, we will yet trudge ahead. Organizations, even those ones where they had to lose people, because in very rough times, they have called back people and said, hey, here is a job, would you want something? So I just think that the 3 C's that I spoke about, absolutely one of the greatest things that we have learned. Our ability to learn. You're looking at the whole thing about a commitment to development, right? Commitment to development. We have learned. We have learned what it is to work from home. We have learned what it is. We don't really have to stay outside. Yes, we will miss a few things. Nobody has to chase us. I can learn anywhere, anytime, anything that I want.
Absolutely.
So look at what is happening to me as an individual. I have learned, I have grown, and I've grown the way that not only what the organization wants me to learn, but there are a lot of subtle learnings that I've learned along the way. So the pandemic, in a way, is a blessing. It's almost like, I hate to put it this way, but there is a silver lining in every cloud. And these are very dark clouds.
Absolutely, absolutely amazing answer. Because personally, for me, what I was in terms of exposure, learning, my network, and what it is today, this pandemic has actually made a huge impact. And it actually gave me, it was, I would say, a source for a lot of learning and a lot of networking. Thank you. And it was a brilliant points that you have actually mentioned. This reminds me of uh, a statement which Raja Krishnamurti normally makes, Kitty, he normally makes: share, care, and sacrifice, he says. And all these three, if you typically look at, is what you're talking about: connect, care, and commitment. If you have the commitment, you're able to do it. Brilliant. Thank you. Now, taking this a bit further, getting the population aspect to it, considering the current Indian population and considering the demographic with respect to age and education, right? Would you consider, or would you believe that it is an important period where India can actually grow and make a place for the global leadership, and also support in the global upliftment?
I'll try to put this in two parts. I think India needs India for itself right now.
Mhm.
And I also think that India needs India for the world. India needs India for itself because I think we're a developing nation.
Mhm.
There's a lot that has got to be done. Today, if you're looking at some of the reforms that are being brought about, even if you just take the simple one, which is around education,
Yeah.
it's a spectacular one. The move to look at skills and get the degrees to be where they ought to be. You do a 1 year, you get a certification and degrees and so on, and you know what the rules are and the laws are. But look at the shift that India is making. You're looking at national skills depository. You're looking at people who are wanting to, there are people who are working just on skilling. Because if you start to skill, if you start to skill, reskill, and upskill, then we would have done a big favor unto ourselves for the country. Now, you're looking at what we can for the world. Well, our portals of knowledge are full of people who do an outstanding job. I mean, we always beat our chest and say, well, there are so many global leaders, all of them who have an Indian name to it and an Indian heart beating in them, right?
Right.
That's because of the country that we are. This is the oldest civilization, which is so steeped in education. So I think that India has a lot that it can offer to the world. We have to, and the government is doing a lot of work around it. We have to get a lot of policies in place. We got to get the right education in place. We
Mhm.
have always bothered a lot about, are we getting the right institutes in place? We have cared less about, do we have the right teachers in that place? We have cared a lot about sharing of the rivers and the water that they carry. Today, they are caring more about, hey, do we have good infrastructure? So there are roads getting built. And we can go a whole lot into it. And I think, as I mentioned, I started with India for India and India for the world. India for the world is a lot into, I mean, I would say predominantly three sectors. If you look at the first sector, which is the whole sector which we have never spent a lot of time about, is education. Really speaking, if for 1.5 billion and we are climbing on the literacy rate, if India is able to do something, we can do a whole lot more, learn from others, and do a better job of education here. And by the way, we can send a whole lot of the stuff today, because everything today can be done by just sitting in front of a camera, and then you can have a laptop, and you can have a lot of jobs which are outsourced, right? A lot of services can be outsourced. And that's where India can play a leading role, because it can generate a lot of jobs at one end. At another end, I also recognize every time there is a job which is outsourced, there are people in India who learn about those jobs. I know of many people who have worked in such organizations, who come out of organizations, set up their own, and they say, hey, listen, if those companies can do it, I can do it. And then they start to provide employment to others in the field of technology, in the field of medicine. Now, by the way, all this is osmosis, right? I mean, I learn something, I give back something. So
Right.
there's a lot that we can learn. There's a lot that we can give. There are experts who can speak a lot more knowledgeably about it. But in my limited way of looking at it from the eyes of an HR professional, I just think that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Look at what happened. I'll give you a very small tidbit.
Mhm.
When there was pandemic, the reactions of some of the leading nations of the world, developed, so-called the developed nations of the world, the first thing that they did was they went and hacked their people that they had in their organizations. And they said, let's take all that work, and they shipped them to India. I don't think that there were a lot of organizations in India saying, okay, we've got to pack a lot of people home. Maybe we are wired differently, but there are opportunities. So for all of us who are on the call today, perhaps we got to be looking at what opportunities lie out there that we can use and make it useful, just not for ourselves, but for the world as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. In fact, this reminds me of a report which was published in 2018, but I read it recently, and it became for me, it's become more like a Bible currently, and started doing a lot of research in that aspect. It is estimated that in by 2030, there's going to be close to 47% of talent crunch across the globe. And India is the only geography in the globe which will have a surplus talent. So I see that as a humongous opportunity where, like rightly you said, India for India and India for the rest of the world. It's a huge opportunity for us.
Well,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thanks.
I mean, if you look at just the number of people, see, there is a demographic divide that you have in India, which is unparalleled in the world.
Right.
Unparalleled. This is the youngest country
Yeah,
in the oldest country. We have the
absolutely.
youngest talent in the oldest nation. So I think there's a lot that we can give to the world. As I always believe, charity begins at home. This is something that we do for our country and we do for others.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for the viewers, it's such an important point, and such an important point which Nathan has mentioned. Youngest population of the oldest country. You know what is the statistic? 65% of Indian population is less than 42 years of age, with a median age of 28 years, which is brilliant. And our culture talks about over 10,000 years. Beautiful. Thanks a lot, Nathan. And taking you further to the next question. In your career as a senior leader, you have seen baby boomers to millennials, and now Generation Z is coming out and putting their small steps into the career. Next 5 years, I'm sure the entire workforce probably would be dominated, if close to 40-50% by millennials and Generation Z. Their thought process, the passion, their outlook, the way they look at life is totally different. It's completely different, if not 100% shift, but it's a completely different. How do you see this, and what kind of suggestions or advice would you give for these youngsters who would probably be taking up the leadership roles, a pretty important role. I might not use the word leader, but important role in every walk of life 6 years down the line?
So when you look at the millennials, at some stage, Venkat, you and I were millennials as well,
Right.
because we were all in our teens growing up, and then we crossed over, then had our first job. Uh, Speaking through the eyes of a person who's a Gen Xer, in my own organization, 85% of the people that we have are millennials. This is incredible. So when you're sitting at a executive meeting, you're surrounded by people who are all Gen Xers.
Mhm.
It didn't seem right. So we decided that we've got to have a millennial person sitting in that room. So we have a chief, well, we don't call this person as a chief millennial officer, but we have a millennial sitting in on our executive.
Beautiful.
It's important because then you get to hear the voice of the millennial. There is no policy that is prepared and cleared without getting the voice of the millennial in the room. This is extremely important. But back to the question, larger questions, how do you really respond to what is happening around? I don't want to be pedantic, but I can only say the first thing that we can do is learn from what is happening around us in the here and now.
Mhm.
And some of this learning can be indelible. For instance, one of the first things that I learned when I was a millennial once upon a time was I was given a job, straight out of campus, I was given a job to be running transport for a manufacturing organization in the heart of then Bihar. It was not something that I really liked but it was an important job. The organization was an explosives manufacturing organization, very famous. And my job was to look after cars and trucks and make sure that we have the fire engines which are in fine fettle, of course, a couple of ambulances and so on and so forth. One day somebody came up to me and said, I want a car. There's a requisition and I need a car and I need to go to the nearest district headquarters, which was about some 3 hours away by car. Problem was, of the 5 cars that I had, 4 were in the garage, and the only car that was about was a car which I had to keep because the ambulances were in the garage as well. So if anything happens, then at worst, I could have a car that could transport any person who needed that. So I said, well, I don't have a car, and I'm sorry, you can't get it. In those days, you didn't have an Uber. There are no Olas. There are no tourist cabs around. They are in the heart of a jungle manufacturing explosives for the world. My boss, he then escalated this to my boss, my super boss, which is general manager, who got me into a room. This is a huge room. He brought me to his table and then he started to really pile on. Really, he was shouting at me. And I was then a very timid guy, you must believe me. And the more he shouted at me, I was shaking. And I said, what do I do? I don't have cars. I can't manufacture cars. He said, you could have asked me, Nathan. I would have sent my car. I have a car. You could have asked me, but you did not. And then suddenly the door opened and there was a gentleman who ran and stood in front of me. That is between me and the general manager. This person stood in front of me, looked at me and he says, Nathan, you may go. And then he looked at the general manager and says, while the boy may be responsible, I'm accountable. He happened to be a gentleman called Captain Nautiyal. Captain Nautiyal, I remember right through my life because that was my first lesson in leadership, stand up for your people. Now, he didn't come back and pontificate. He didn't say, hey, Nathan, you should do this. This is how you stand up for your people. There were no big training rooms, 5-hour sessions. No. You learn by watching what is happening around. You learn by doing a few things. Would I ever throw anybody under the bus? Never. Anybody who's part of my team? Never. Why? Because of what we learned. So, what can we as millennials do in today's age? By the way, the millennials today are far sharper than the ones that were born into the industry 30, 35 years ago. Many of them are digital natives. Many of them can do a lot of things that we cannot do. But each one has their own strengths. We got to play to people's strengths. So to the millennials, one of the things that I would like to put out as a challenge is know your strengths. Work on your strengths. Strengthen your strengths. And I would never say weaken your weaknesses right now, because that is too tall an order. Everybody focuses on the weakness. I think you just got to focus on your strength, because that is the one that defines you. What's the point? I mean, the best thing that I learned from my coach who taught me how to run, there is no way that even if I tried my level best, I could be a sprinter. I could weaken my weakness from 14 seconds, I could bring it down to 13 and a half seconds, but that would never get me in the door.
Absolutely.
But if I focused on my long distance running, I could continue to be one of the best long distance runner. Of course, if I had put my entire life onto long distance running and I wanted to run, etc., etc. But regardless, that's the lesson. Focus on our strengths. So back to you, Venkat. Sure.
As I said, there's some specific, subtle, very important points that you have shared, Nathan, and I'm sure these are going to be extremely important and critical for everyone. Specifically, the points that you have shared with respect to connect, care, and commitment, and what is that we have learned from the pandemic, as well as building on the strengths. I think these are certain important aspects which are going to be extremely useful for not just the younger kids, but even like people like me. Normally, when we typically look into the areas of improvement, sort of areas, but I think even though we concentrate on the areas of improvement, but we need to capitalize through our strengths and try to build on it. Thank you. Thanks a lot. It was wonderful speaking to you, and immense gratitudes for your time as well as sharing this wisdom with us. Thank you, Nathan.
As you were speaking, a couple of things came to my mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think very early in our days, there are two things that we are not particularly good at. And this we learned over a period of time. One is our ability to showcase what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So in Hindi, they say, Neki kar kuein mein dal, which is do all your good work and just put it into the well.
Right.
Yeah, and this is a loose way of saying, if you've done a good work, I mean, just keep quiet. Today's age, we need people to know what you have done. The world needs to know. So can we communicate better about our value? The biggest dissatisfaction that we have today is, do people know our true value? And by the way, do we know our true value?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing that I would like to close upon on in my concluding comment. The other one that I would say is, every person needs a helping hand.
Right.
You could be the finest, the greatest in your field, but you need somebody. Adnan Sami said this many years, lift kara de.
Lift kara de.
Yeah, you need somebody who can do that zara sa lift, because that lift is important. And as you grow in your life, can you do that same thing for somebody else? And you will find you need to find a coach.
Right.
You need to find a mentor. A coach will tell you what are your strengths. A mentor will hone those for you and help you find that. They are more like mirrors. They will show you who you truly are. So find your calling, find your coach, find your mentor, because they are really valuable. I mean, you could be sitting on a mine of goodness within yourself, but you need to be looking at what are the two things that will make me even better. So one is, do I showcase the value that I bring? Two, do I have a good coach? Do I have a good mentor? And do I have large ears which can accept criticism? And do I have the sagacity to work on them? Because it's just not accepting the criticism, but to work on the criticism as well. So, Venkat, I can go on and on and on, but I'll always be grateful to something that happened to me years ago. And this is for 8 years, you won't believe me, Venkat. For 8 years, I was not promoted.
Mm-hmm.
All my friends got promoted. I didn't get promoted. I went up to this gentleman who was my super boss and I said, is anything wrong with me? And he said, focus on what you're doing, you will do well. That's it. Nothing happened. 14th of Jan of a particular year, Lori. On Lori Day, he called me and he said, here is something for you. And that was a letter. And that letter, there was something which says that I'd been double promoted.
Wow.
I'd been double promoted. I just couldn't believe my eyes because I was taking on a job in another company, which was the role of a person who had gotten away from that job. He was a 55-year-old man, and I was, with all my nascent 8 years of work experience, taking on such a role.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I mean. When I went and met him and I thanked him, he says, you didn't get promoted for 8 years because that's what a bamboo does. A bamboo is slow growing. They grow a lot under, just right under, and they develop really long drawn roots. You are drawing roots, and that is important. So draw roots, and the bamboo is flexible. A bamboo can brave the worst of the hurricanes, and I'm sure that he will do well, etc., etc. But I still remember, and I thanked him because when I came away, I realized the import of what he just said beyond the bamboos, that here was a man who trusted an 8-year-old professional to take on the job which was vacated by a person who had almost 33 years of work experience or 35 years of work experience. He allowed me to take on the job. So maybe all we need to do is find such people. Somebody took a risk. Can you take that risk as you grow in your life? So those are my concluding thoughts. Back to you, Venkat. It's been just a fascinating time. You're asking all great questions. I really wish that this could go on forever. But as you and I know that we all have to get back to what we do best, work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nathan. I would connect back with you offline and send you a message because there's some other thing which I got an idea from what you just spoke on that. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nathan. And it's certainly a great pleasure listening to you. Looking forward to your office truths again. If that as a
Thank you.
as a book.
Surely. And thank you for egging me on. One of these days, I do believe we got to get that out as a book. If it is this year, so be it, or perhaps the next year. On that note, again, Venkat, back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan.
People who are listening in, thank you for humoring us. Appreciate your time. Bye-bye.
Bye, friends. Thanks a lot.